Hi and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to watch Caesar's Great Roman Civil War, how it all started. I thought this would be better to do this, what do you want to call it, episode before going into the Roman Civil War, right? To kind of show how the snowball started, if you may. So this is Kings and Generals. And original videos down below. Let's go.
The 1st century BC was a time of great men in Rome. Great, but destructive. Men such as Sulla, Marius, Cicero, Cato, Crassus, Pompey and Caesar, whose military or political careers would be studied for centuries to come.
That's true.
Individually, each of these men had the skills and abilities to bring glory and prosperity to Rome. However, when put in conflict with each other, they would lead to the destruction of the Republic, which had lasted for almost 450 years. This is the story of the Great Roman Civil War.
Although you can make an argument, because of the Civil War and the end of the Republic and the start of the Empire, technically the borders and all that was the Roman Empire before Roman Republic, extended its life, right? Albeit slowly decaying over and over, right? But still growing in power and size.
In order to fully understand how the Great Roman Civil War, also known as Caesar's Civil War, began, we need to grasp the cultural and historical background. Since the mid-2nd century BC, the Roman Republic had started fracturing with the assassination of the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, two revolutionary and popular politicians. Their deaths underlined the growing social divide between the upper and lower classes in Rome, and the instability carried on into the following decades, with revolts in Sicily, the social war with Italian allies, and ultimately the civil wars of Sulla and Marius at the start of the 1st century BC. Those two showed the political rift between those who believed power came from the plebs, the populares like Marius, and those who believed power came from the Senate, the optimates such as Sulla. Moreover, their war had...
I mean, you can argue Caesar tried to combine both, right? He was a populist, right? And he used the populace against the Senate, but he also used the Senate for the benefit or destruction of the populace, right? You can argue that. Although, in a grand scheme of things, Caesar is more on the populist side, and Pompey is more on the Senate side. Although it's more blurry than that, but, you know.
Exposed flaws in the Roman Republican system, proving that political and military power could be easily subverted. Though after his victory, Sulla had, as dictator, introduced legislation to try and stop anyone following in his footsteps, the precedent had already been set.
Right, that is the funny thing. And that's why the US and the Constitution there was one of the greatest documents ever written by a human person, right? Because, like all people, when you struggle against a power, you are noble, you are for the person to your left and right. When you have got sole power or more power, you don't want anyone to have more power than you, right? But like he said, he set a precedent, and now the floodgates has opened.
A general could march on Rome, take it by force, and impose his own will on the Republic. If enough soldiers were personally loyal to an individual general, the senators could do little to curtail that man's power. Furthermore,
one thing though that I'll say here, or what he just said, he is insinuating that he's talking about Caesar. If you watch my last episode on Pompey's year, I'll leave that in the description down below. You see that the Senate sort of was behind Pompey. he was proclaimed dictator, but for longer than a dictator should rule, he took with him military into Rome, marched the military into Rome to put down the unrest and to keep order. I know kings and generals are insinuating that he's talking about Caesar when he's saying marching into Rome, claiming power, military is looking up to Caesar, but the same goes for Pompey. Even though he can say, oh, I'm for the Senate and all that. No. He did the same thing that Caesar did. Now you can argue how much the troops loved Pompey, but Pompey was actually a more, you can say, more respected or more achieving general than Caesar, because Caesar's wars are illegal, but Pompey's conquests, those are not illegal, you know? Comment down below in the comments if you disagree with me, but what he's saying about Caesar or insinuating about Caesar is the same for Pompey. I'm just saying.
The Republic's constitution, with its numerous checks and balances, was proving to be one of the crucial factors in its destruction. Powerful politicians were able to paralyze the government by blocking the legislation they disagreed with. Often it took either a dictatorship or martial law to break the stalemate. It was in this political environment that the first triumvirate had emerged. Consisting of Crassus, Pompey and Caesar, the triumvirate dictated political life for the majority of the era. Crassus was an established politician and the richest man in Rome, bankrolling the triumvirate and paying bribes as necessary. Pompey was Rome's most accomplished general. Following the social war, he fought alongside Sulla in his civil war and later led campaigns in Sicily, Africa, Pontus and Syria. This brought him vast amounts of wealth, numerous political allies, and the loyalty of thousands of veterans. Caesar, at 41 years old, was the youngest and least established of the three. He had held the positions of quaestor and aedile, and had shown promise as a praetor in Spain. However, Caesar was Pontifex Maximus, the highest religious official in Rome. Through this office, Caesar had the power to pass divine laws and to postpone elections due to signs from the gods. Additionally,
which he did.
As one of the leaders of the populares, Caesar had already established himself as a populist and had significant clout with the masses. By 59,
I mean, it makes sense that the ruler of the religion is a populist more than connecting to the Senate, right? It just makes sense. Right.
9 BC, the triumvirate was established. Caesar was already indebted to Crassus, and his alliance with Pompey was solidified by marrying his daughter Julia to Pompey. Though never an official coalition, these three men controlled almost every aspect of the Republic. Crassus influenced the Senate and aristocracy, the Optimates, with bribes. Pompey's military prestige effectively gave him control of the veterans and the way they would vote.
That is true. Which, a funny thing though, Crassus controlled the Senate in bribes and all that. But when Caesar became a consul, he was a pretty staunch anti-bribery, right? Although he did bribes as well. So maybe the rift started there.
And Caesar could control the masses. With the support of Pompey and Crassus, Caesar was elected to the consulship in 59 BC and immediately passed land reform legislation to provide land to Pompey's veterans and ratified Pompey's eastern conquests. Initially, following Caesar's consulship, the Senate made him an overseer of woods and pastures in Italy rather than a governor of a province, as was the norm for an ex-consul. However, the triumvirate was able to overturn this decision. Caesar was given the governorship of Illyria, Cisalpine Gaul, and Transalpine Gaul, along with 4 legions for the extent of 5 years, as opposed to the usual 1. Though it is clear that the triumvirates did abuse their power to achieve their own means, it did benefit Rome in some ways, pushing through much-needed laws, such as the settling of veterans, without risk of the Senate creating a stalemate.
That is all true. However, an important thing is It's about how you do it. They did this all, the good land reforms, the veterans' homes and all that. But how did they accomplish that? By bribery. So that's not going to last that long, because someone else can just come there and do the same thing but get rid of all that, or do something even worse with bribery, which they've already done, but you know.
In this same year, Claudius Pulcher became tribune of the plebs. Claudius had given up his patrician status to hold the position, and used it to push a number of populist reforms with the support of the triumvirate, such as the establishment of a grain dole. Claudius had also learned how effective violence could be in politics, and had put together trained gangs who would harass and assault any politicians who got in his way, and he was even able to force the influential Cicero into exile. After just 1 year of Claudius and his gangs ruling the streets of Rome, it became clear that the triumvirate would not be able to control him. Claudius had even gone so far as to attempt to assassinate Pompey, when the latter suggested recalling Cicero from exile. In response, Pompey allowed another tribune, Milo, an optimate, to raise his own gangs to counter Claudius's. No weapons were meant to be allowed in Rome, but each side secretly armed themselves with daggers and swords, employing thugs and even gladiators. For the next...
You know what? This is again the reason why, let's just take gun-free zones, never work. Because if in a gun-free zone, which 2 or 3 people, let's say, have weapons or guns, right? Criminals, police, and you can say military. So 2 of them are governments and 1 is criminals. And which is the 4th one that doesn't have a gun in a gun-free zone, or can't, will be arrested and become a criminal? The normal everyday citizen, right? This is what happens. You have in Rome, you can't, there's laws that say you can't have weapons, and you can't have a military or be a part of a military or a leader in the military in Rome while you're in Rome, right? But that is just a place where criminals, corrupt politicians are going to use violence to get what they want to get, which what happens here, right? I leave a link down below in the description of my Year of Chaos, which details this very good.
Few years, the 2 tribunes and their gangs battled regularly in the streets. Rome was in chaos. The triumvirate was reaffirmed in 56 BC, after which Pompey and Crassus extended Caesar's term as governor by another 5 years, while Caesar sent veterans from Gaul back to Rome to ensure that Pompey and Crassus would be elected consuls for the year 55 to 54 BC. However, soon after, the triumvirate began to fracture. In 54 BC, Julia died.
Let's just think why. We've seen the reasoning of Caesar being a more populist and Pompey being a more, I don't know what you call them, a more Senate guy, right? Because all 3 are different. Caesar wants to be anti-corruption, bribes. Crassus is that. Caesar is more on the populist side. Pompey is more on the Senate side. And again, the reason why they succeeded is just because of those 3 reasons, right? They all scratched each other's backs, which was fine. But then when a little thing happens, it turns into a massive thing that they all 3 are going to disagree with. And you saw that assassination attempt. Perhaps Crassus was behind that assassination attempt.
Died in childbirth, severing the personal connection between the 2 triumvirs. In 53 BC, Crassus embarked on his disastrous Parthian campaign, subsequently dying at the Battle of Carrhae. Moreover, the following year, Claudius was killed by Milo. With Claudius dead and the triumvirate broke, Pompey and Caesar were left as the 2 most powerful men in Rome. Chaos in the city only increased, as during Claudius's funeral, his supporters started a riot. His body was taken to the Senate house to be burnt on a pyre, and the Senate building itself was destroyed.
One funny thing, not that funny, but it is funny. Claudius threatened some senators who tried to stop him entering the Senate building. He said to them something about, I'm gonna make the mob burn the Senate building, or at least that part, right? And when they burned Claudius' body in that building, it burned down.
In 52 BC, Pompey was named sole consul and was given extraordinary powers. Soldiers were marched into the capital, trials held under armed guard, and executions made. This was ruthless but effective, and order was restored.
Right. When Pompey does it, it's to restore order, which is true. But when Caesar does it, he's there to take power. But one distinction that I will make is that I believe Pompey recused himself. He stepped down after all was restored. So that's a difference.
The Senate awarded Pompey with an extended term of governance in Hispania, as well as powers similar to those that Caesar held in Gaul. Pompey decided to leave the governance of his provinces to lieutenants. His quelling of the riots had brought him the adoration of the Senate and Optimates, and he was not willing to give up such power and influence by leaving Rome. The Senate had their own ambitions. With Claudius dead, Caesar was left as the leader of the populares. Cato and other senators were becoming increasingly worried that Caesar might choose to exploit his popularity and march on Rome. He was, in the Senate's mind, a threat to the Republic. The more this was said, the more Pompey agreed. When the triumvirate was first...
That is a distinction that you have to make. The Senate sees itself as the Republic, which you can say technically is true. However, in a republic, it's the people who elect the representatives in the Senate or whatever, right? So you can say technically, yes, the Senate is the Republic, but that's not how that works. Power has come to their head, to Pompey and to Caesar. And it's all going to boil down in a civil war.
First formed, Pompey had little to fear from Caesar. However, Caesar's Gallic wars allowed him to accumulate wealth, popularity with the masses, and a core of loyal, battle-hardened veterans. Caesar had grown his army to around 10 legions, approximately 50,000 men, more than double what he had originally been assigned. Moreover, the majority of these legions had been raised by Caesar personally, led by Caesar in battle, and thus would undoubtedly be loyal to him. It had taken Sulla only 6 legions to march on Rome, and there was every chance that Caesar could do the same. As a result, the Senate, and in particular the prominent Cato the Younger, began rallying an anti-Caesar alliance in the Senate, mainly consisting of Optimates. With Pompey and Caesar already positioned to confront each other as the two most powerful men in Rome, the Senate turned to Pompey to lead the Optimates and remove Caesar as a threat. The problem that the Senate faced was that Caesar was simply too powerful. His army was too large to be confronted head-on, and his popularity was too great for him to be defeated in an election.
This is the funny thing. When you're corrupt, you would just think in that way. The easiest thing the Senate could do is to make themselves popular in the people's eyes. But instead, they just go for the person who they think is the leader of the populace or whatever. That's how you think when you're corrupt. You don't think about the people or what you can change so people like you more, right? No bribes, right? The Senate could easily sway the populace by doing something, right? But they didn't. I don't know if they wanted to, if they were just so corrupt that they just saw Caesar as their main enemy. But, you know.
At this time in 52 BC, Caesar was still governor of Gaul and had applied to run for the office of consul in absentia for the year 48 BC, his term as governor ending in 49 BC. With 52 BC being such a chaotic year with riots in Rome, Caesar's
Yep.
application had been allowed with little thought, but now presented a problem. Holding the office of governor or consul gave Caesar legal immunity. If he ran in absentia for the consulship, he would almost certainly win due to his vast popularity, and his legal immunity would continue.
Right, so again, why don't the Senate, who hates Caesar, try to sway the people? I can just see on the writing on the wall what they're going to do. They're just going to either get rid of that rule that he can rule in absent, right? That's probably what they're going to do. And again, what does the people see in their eyes that you're doing? You're putting yourself between the people and Caesar.
Moreover, he would be able to use this term as consul to push legislation to protect himself. It was undeniable that Caesar had committed crimes as consul, including stirring political violence against a fellow consul, as well as crimes as a governor by instigating wars in Gaul and Britain that were not authorized by the Senate.
True.
The Senate could not defeat Caesar militarily, nor could they defeat him in the voting booths. A solution was needed. Cato had already made it clear that given an opportunity, he would put Caesar on trial himself. All that was needed was for Caesar to be a private citizen. As a result, through some cunning yet ultimately contrived readings of the law, the Senate insisted that Caesar's governorship would end in 52 BC and not 50 BC, and that he would resign command of his army. Caesar refused. He understood that as soon as he lost his legal immunity, the Senate would have him put on trial. He also knew that his governorship was, in fact, legal, and that he had the right to continue his governorship in command until the previously agreed date at the end of 49 BC.
Exactly. I mean, all Caesar can do is just argue and say, yeah, but you made the rules and I'm following the rules. Even though you can say it was corrupt and all that, but they're also corrupt saying, oh no, we're going to move it back or forwards, I guess. This is a problem. This is when you know civil war is going on, when everybody's so corrupt and just not using the law as it says it should be used. But, you know.
The 52 BC deadline passed without issue, and Caesar's command continued.
Okay.
For the next 2 years, the Pompeian faction in the Senate, headed by Cato, increasingly demanded Caesar's resignation, while the Caesarian faction, headed by Curio and Mark Antony, both plebeian tribunes, continually blocked and vetoed such legislation. In December 50
which they can do.
BC, Pompey himself offered to resign his command if Caesar would first. The Caesarians vehemently opposed this, insisting that Pompey be first to resign. Neither side was willing to be exposed and undefended. That same month, Caesar marched with 1 legion to Ravenna and wrote a letter to the Senate attempting to negotiate, again insisting that if Pompey resigned his command first, so would he. Whether Caesar marched his legion to Ravenna simply to winter there, or if he meant it as an actual threat, is not clear. However, rumors spread that Caesar in fact had 4 legions with him, not just 1. To the Senate, it appeared Caesar was attempting to threaten and blackmail them. In response, they again ordered him to step down immediately and authorized Pompey to start amassing legions to defend Rome. Caesar once again attempted to negotiate. He offered to resign his governorship of Cisalpine Gaul and the majority of his legions, but requested to keep the governorship of Illyricum along with 2 legions until the original deadline, the end of 49 BC, and that he...
I mean, what is the Senate going to do? This seems, in my eyes, I don't know what Caesar had in mind or whatever. He probably didn't want a civil war, I don't know. But I mean, that seems pretty good. He gets Illyria and has 2 legions. Sure. But I guess they're going to double down.
He would be allowed to run for consul for 48 BC, hoping to extend his legal immunity. However, this was still a reasonable deal for the Senate, and it would achieve their aim of severely limiting Caesar's power and influence.
True.
Cicero acted as a mediator for the deal and negotiated Caesar down to just 1 legion and 2 provinces.
Wow.
Pompey was willing to accept. However, key Optimate senators, including Cato and the consul Lentulus, refused the deal. While Pompey was not as ardently devoted to the Senate, the hardline Optimates like Cato and Lentulus hated the notion that the Senate might be forced to negotiate.
Wow.
On the 7th of January, the Senate voted again to immediately strip Caesar of all his powers and armies. Once again, Caesar's tribunes in the Senate, Curio and Antony, vetoed the legislation. The Senate had expected as much, and passed the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, the final act, an unvetoable act that suspended all laws and gave all powers to the consuls, effectively declaring a national emergency, and they declared Caesar an enemy of the state.
Right, but they're basically mainly consuls, the dictators. But this is what I don't get. The Senate are so fearful. The Senate are so fearful of Caesar. They double down, triple down, get rid of veto powers on a law, which I don't know if that makes sense, but sure. And they give all power to 2 consulars. I'm guessing those 2 consulars are under the thumb of the Senate, or at least some populares and optimates, but still. That's setting a precedent. But okay.
The consuls for the year, Lentulus and Marcellus, both hardline Optimates, immediately pass all their powers to Pompey, effectively giving Pompey full control of the Roman Republic. That same night, Caesar's allies in Rome fled to Ravenna to join him. The stage was now set. After years of attempted negotiations, a complete impasse had been reached. The division between the 2 parties, the Populares and Optimates, was the same division that had led to the deaths of the Gracchi and the wars of Sulla and Marius. The Populares largely consisted of younger men from less established families, such as Mark Antony, Trebonius and Curio, or lesser members of noble families, such as Decimus Brutus. The Pompeian Optimates, on the other hand, were mainly aristocrats of noble families, including Pompey's 2 sons, Gnaeus and Sextus, Ahenobarbus, Metellus Scipio, a descendant of the famous Scipio Africanus, Cato the Younger, and Cicero. The societal rift between these 2 groups, which had first become apparent almost 100 years ago with the deaths of the Gracchi, was about to plunge the Republic into chaos once again. On the 10th of January, 49 BC, Caesar left Ravenna with the 13th Legion and his allies from Rome. They halted at a small river that marked the border of the province of Italy, the Rubicon. It was forbidden for any general to cross this boundary with arms or an army. To do so would be a clear declaration of war. Caesar spent a long time weighing his options. Caesar's own family had been persecuted and hunted in the aftermath of Sulla's civil war, and he knew well how destructive such wars were. However, he also knew that if he disbanded his army, he would likely be exiled or executed. After almost a day's deliberation, Caesar made his choice. Alia iacta est, the die is cast. The great Roman civil war had begun.
Wow, that was an amazing video. It shows everything from start to finish. From when Caesar is crossing the Rubicon. Wow, amazing. We will be seeing more of this. We'll continue at the beginning of the Roman Civil War. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.